1 minute ago, the sea just turned into a war zone. 1 minute ago, the sea did not suddenly become more dangerous because of waves or weather. It became dangerous because of power. A single maritime incident, reported quietly, then amplified across global monitoring systems, has turned a stretch of ocean into a focal point of international attention. Ships adjusted their routes. Insurers recalculated risk. Governments issued carefully worded statements. This is not just about one incident at sea. It is about authority, enforcement, and who gets to decide the rules when global interests collide. So the real question is not what happened on the water, but what it represents. Is this a contained security response, or a sign that the balance of global power at sea is shifting? According to initial reports from maritime tracking services and official statements, a serious security incident unfolded in a strategically important maritime zone. Multiple vessels were affected. Naval assets were deployed. Commercial traffic slowed or altered course. Authorities described the situation using terms such as defensive action, security enforcement, and risk mitigation. At the same time, shipping advisories warned of heightened danger and urged vessels to exercise extreme caution. Importantly, this did not begin as a declared military engagement. There was no formal announcement of conflict, no official declaration of war. Instead, what unfolded was a rapid escalation of presence and control in a shared maritime space, an area used daily by commercial ships, energy transporters, and civilian crews from dozens of countries. Within minutes, what is normally considered neutral international water became a zone of strategic concern. From the outside, it may appear sudden. From inside the system, many analysts argue it was predictable. From the perspective of the actors initiating enforcement or military presence, the justification is rooted in security and legality. Officials emphasize that the actions taken were preventive, not aggressive, defensive, not expansionist, necessary to uphold safety, freedom of navigation, or international obligations in this view, allowing unchecked activity, whether military, commercial, or hybrid, creates long-term instability. Enforcement, they argue, is meant to prevent escalation, not cause it. Supporters of this position often point to existing security threats, prior warnings or incidents, legal interpretations of maritime authority from this angle. Restraint would be interpreted not as diplomacy, but as weakness. And in global power politics, weakness is rarely ignored. From the opposing perspective, the same actions are seen very differently. Here, the incident is described as provocative, disproportionate, a violation of established norms. Officials and analysts on this side argue that increased military presence in shared waters undermines trust and turns commercial zones into potential flashpoints. They emphasize that international waters should not become tools of pressure. Security concerns must be addressed multilaterally. Unilateral action increases the risk of miscalculation. Most importantly, they warn that once militarization becomes routine, de-escalation becomes harder, not easier. What one side calls enforcement, the other sees as encroachment. And that difference in interpretation is where tension grows. To understand why this matters, we need to step back from the headlines and look at the system. The world's oceans are governed by overlapping layers of international maritime law, national security doctrines, trade agreements, naval presence, and power projection. There is no single authority at sea. Order is maintained through a fragile balance of rules, norms, and deterrence. When a major power acts, even within its legal interpretation, the impact extends far beyond the immediate incident. Every move is watched. Every response is measured. This is not chaos, but it is stress on a system already under pressure. If you're finding this breakdown useful and value calm, fact-based analysis without sensationalism, consider subscribing to the channel. We focus on understanding global events, not reacting to them. To understand why a single maritime incident can attract global attention, it is necessary to understand one core truth. The sea is not just a transportation route. It is infrastructure. Every day, more than 80% of global trade by volume moves across the oceans. Energy supplies, food shipments, medical goods, raw materials, and consumer products all depend on maritime stability. When something disrupts that stability, Even briefly, the effects travel faster than the ships themselves. This is why maritime security incidents are never treated as isolated events. They immediately intersect with energy security, food supply chains, national economic planning, strategic military calculations. When a zone at sea becomes contested or dangerous, it forces decisions far beyond the water itself. Shipping companies reroute vessels. Insurers reassess premiums. Governments consult contingency plans. Markets react not to what has already happened, but to what might happen next. In this sense, the sea functions like a global nervous system. A disturbance in one area sends signals everywhere. That is why no serious power views maritime enforcement as just business. It is leverage, visibility, and influence combined. Behind every ship involved in a maritime incident are people whose names rarely appear in headlines. Crews are often multinational. Captains may come from one country, engineers from another, deck officers from several more. Many spend months away from home, working under complex contractual conditions. When a maritime zone suddenly becomes high risk, crews face extended voyages and uncertainty, mental and physical stress increases, delays can strand workers at sea far longer than planned for families on shore, communication may become limited. For crews, decisions made by distant governments translate into immediate consequences. Ports may refuse entry. Ships may be redirected mid-journey. Legal status can become unclear. None of these individuals shape geopolitical strategy, yet they often bear its weight most directly. This human dimension is rarely central to official statements, but it remains an essential part of understanding what is truly at stake. At the center of analysis is a fundamental question. Is this escalation, or is it enforcement? From one viewpoint, enforcement is necessary to maintain order. Rules that are never enforced eventually stop functioning. Deterrence, in this framework, prevents worse outcomes by setting clear boundaries. From another viewpoint, enforcement itself can become escalation when applied unilaterally or without broad consensus. What begins as regulation can quickly feel like pressure or even provocation to those on the receiving end. This ambiguity is not accidental. It is built into how power operates in international systems. Actions are often designed to be strong enough to send a message, ambiguous enough to avoid direct confrontation. This creates a gray zone where disagreement is inevitable. The danger lies not in one action, but in patterns. Repeated enforcement measures, each justified on legal or security grounds, can gradually normalize confrontation. And normalization changes expectations. This incident did not emerge in a vacuum. Global politics today is shaped by strategic competition between major powers, fragmentation of international consensus, increasing use of economic and legal tools as instruments of influence. Maritime zones, especially those near choke points or strategic routes, have become arenas where these dynamics intersect. Naval presence is no longer just about defense. It is also about signaling commitment, capability, and resolve. At the same time, diplomatic trust has weakened in many areas. Mechanisms that once reduced miscalculation, such as shared frameworks or reliable communication, are under strain. In this environment, even minor incidents carry added weight, not because they are unprecedented, but because the margin for error is smaller. Markets respond not to certainty, but to uncertainty. When shipping routes are disrupted or threatened, several immediate effects follow. Insurance premiums increase, transport costs rise, delivery timelines become less predictable. Energy markets are particularly sensitive. Even the perception of risk can influence prices. For economies already dealing with inflation, supply chain disruptions, or fiscal pressure, additional uncertainty becomes a serious concern. Small changes accumulate. Higher shipping costs raise consumer prices, delays affect manufacturing schedules, investment decisions are postponed. None of these outcomes require a full-scale conflict. They occur simply because confidence weakens. This is why economic analysts monitor maritime incidents so closely. The sea may be distant, but its effects reach daily life quickly. Public understanding of geopolitical events is shaped heavily by how they are presented. Different audiences receive different stories. Some emphasize security and enforcement, others highlight provocation and risk simplification as tempting. It makes complex issues easier to consume. But reality rarely fits into clean narratives. In practice, multiple legal interpretations can exist simultaneously. Strategic intent is rarely singular. Public statements often differ from private assessments. This gap between narrative and reality creates misunderstanding. Viewers and readers may feel pressure to choose sides, even when the situation itself is not binary. Understanding global events today requires resisting that pressure and examining how facts, interests, and perceptions interact. International waters are governed by shared conventions, but enforcement depends on national capability. This creates a paradox. Rules exist collectively, power to enforce them does not. Countries interpret maritime law through their own legal frameworks. What one government considers lawful enforcement, another may view as overreach. Disputes arise over jurisdiction, authority, precedent. These disagreements are not easily resolved because there is no single court or mechanism with universal authority. Instead, legality becomes intertwined with influence. This does not mean the system is broken. It means it is contested. And contestation is becoming more frequent as competition intensifies. Beyond immediate outcomes, actions at sea are messages. They communicate. Willingness to act, red lines, strategic priority signals are sent not only to rivals, but to allies and neutral observers. Allies look for consistency. Partners assess reliability. Neutral states evaluate risk. In this sense, maritime incidents function as tests. How a state responds can shape expectations for future behavior. Deterrence relies on clarity, but clarity itself can be destabilizing if perceived as inflexible. This balance between signaling strength and avoiding escalation is one of the most delicate challenges in modern geopolitics. Every significant action sets a reference point. If certain behaviors become accepted, others may adopt similar approaches. This can lead to increased assertiveness, reduced reliance on multilateral mechanisms, greater politicization of shared spaces. Some analysts argue that firm enforcement strengthens order. Others warn it accelerates fragmentation. Both views reflect real risks. The long-term implication is not determined by one incident, but by how patterns evolve. History shows that systems change gradually until they change suddenly. Public statements are only one layer of international relations. Behind closed doors, communication often continues even when rhetoric hardens. Diplomats work to clarify intentions, prevent misunderstandings, establish informal boundaries. These efforts rarely make headlines, but they are crucial. Many past crises were resolved not through public confrontation, but through discreet negotiation. Whether this incident follows that path depends on choices made away from cameras and press releases. Silence in diplomacy is not always absence. Sometimes it is activity. If you appreciate analysis that values context over outrage and understanding over noise, consider subscribing to the channel. This space is dedicated to calm, respectful exploration of global events that shape our shared future. When analysts talk about the future of incidents like this, they rarely speak in certainties. Instead, they outline paths, not forecasts. Not prophecies. Paths. One possible path is containment. In this scenario, the incident remains limited. Naval presence stabilizes, commercial routes gradually normalize, and behind-the-scenes diplomacy prevents further escalation. Public rhetoric cools, not because disagreements disappear, but because all sides recognize the cost of miscalculation. Another path is managed tension. Here, heightened security becomes semi-permanent. Shipping continues, but under increased monitoring. Insurance costs remain elevated. Governments adjust expectations. This does not result in open conflict, but it does reshape how global trade and security operate. Less trust, more caution. A third path involves fragmentation that in this case, shared maritime spaces slowly lose their neutrality. States rely more heavily on unilateral enforcement. Legal disputes multiply. Smaller nations and commercial actors adapt by aligning with stronger powers or withdrawing from contested zones altogether. Each of these paths has historical precedents. None are inevitable. What determines the direction is not a single action, but accumulation, how often incidents occur, how they are resolved, and how much space diplomacy is given to function. At the beginning of this analysis, we asked a simple but unsettling question. Is this just about one incident at sea, or is it about something larger? By now, the answer should feel clearer. This moment is not isolated. It is part of a broader pattern in which oceans, once viewed primarily as shared economic highways, are increasingly treated as arenas of influence. That shift does not happen overnight. It happens gradually, through decisions that feel reasonable in isolation but consequential in combination. One of the deepest tensions in global governance today lies between stability and control. Stability relies on predictability, restraint, and shared expectations. Control relies on enforcement, presence, and the ability to act decisively. Both are necessary. Both can undermine each other. When control is emphasized too heavily, stability erodes. When stability is prioritized without enforcement, rules lose meaning. Maritime governance sits precisely at this crossroads. The sea cannot be owned, yet it can be influenced. How that influence is exercised through cooperation or coercion defines the character of the international system. While headlines often frame events as confrontations between major powers, most of the world watches quietly. Allies observe closely, assessing whether commitments remain credible. Partners calculate risks, weighing economic benefits against political exposure. Neutral states pay particular attention because they depend most on open, predictable systems. For many countries, maritime stability is not an abstract concept. It is directly linked to food security, energy access, economic growth. They may not issue strong statements, but their decisions, where to trade, which routes to use, how to ensure cargo, reflect their assessment of risk. In global politics, silence is often strategic. Institutions matter most when they are tested. Maritime conventions, arbitration mechanisms, and diplomatic forums exist to reduce uncertainty. But their effectiveness depends on participation and trust. When major powers act outside, or at the edges, of shared frameworks, institutions face pressure. Some respond by adapting. Others lose relevance. This does not mean international law disappears. It means its influence fluctuates. The long-term health of global governance depends on whether states see institutions as tools worth preserving or obstacles to be bypassed. That choice is made not once, but repeatedly. Modern oceans are more transparent than ever. Satellite tracking, automated identification systems, real-time analytics, and open-source intelligence mean that maritime movements are constantly observed. This visibility has two effects. First, it enhances accountability. Actions are harder to hide. Claims can be verified or challenged quickly. Second, it accelerates reaction. Incidents that once unfolded quietly now become global within minutes. This speed compresses decision-making time. Leaders must respond faster. Markets react sooner. Narratives form before full information is available. Technology does not create tension, but it amplifies it. One of the most subtle dangers in geopolitics is normalization. When extraordinary measures become routine, their impact changes. Increased naval patrols become expected. Shipping disruptions become accepted costs. Legal disputes become background noise. Normalization does not mean resolution. It means adjustment. Over time, this can lower the threshold for future actions. What once required justification becomes standard practice. The risk is not immediate conflict. It is gradual erosion of shared space. History offers perspective, not instruction. Past rivalries show that competition often plays out through trade restrictions, control of resources, legal and economic pressure. Direct conflict is usually avoided, not out of goodwill, but because of cost. The current moment fits this pattern. What differs is scale and interconnectedness. Global trade is denser. Supply chains are more complex. Economic shocks travel faster. This increases both risk and restraint. No major actor benefits from systemic collapse, but all seek advantage within the system. That tension defines the era. Restraint is often misunderstood as weakness. In reality, it is a strategic choice. It requires confidence, not hesitation. It involves knowing when not to act. At sea, restraint means clear communication, proportional response, respect for shared norms, even when disputed restraint does not resolve disagreements. It prevents them from becoming irreversible. Global markets are not passive. They adapt. Companies diversify routes. Insurers refine risk models. States invest in redundancy. These adaptations reduce vulnerability, but they also increase cost. Efficiency gives way to resilience. This shift may define the next phase of globalization, not reversal, but recalibration. Much of what prevents escalation never becomes public. Military-to-military communication channels, diplomatic hotlines, informal understandings. These mechanisms are imperfect, but they matter. They allow clarification when signals are misread. They provide off-ramps when pressure builds. Their effectiveness depends on trust, and trust requires use. Even strained relationships rely on conversation. This incident reveals several truths about the current world. Power is increasingly exercised through systems, not declarations. Economic tools and security tools are deeply intertwined. Shared spaces are becoming contested by default. It also reveals something more subtle. Despite tension, there remains a strong incentive to avoid collapse. The system is strained, but it still holds. So, was this simply one incident at sea? Or was it a signal of something deeper? The answer lies not in choosing one interpretation, but in recognizing that both can be true at once. It was an event, and it was a message about rules, influence, and the future shape of global order. The sea has always reflected human ambition. It connects continents, enables trade, and carries the weight of economies. It has also been a stage for rivalry, exploration, and power. Today, it reflects something else as well, a world negotiating its next balance. This moment does not demand alarm. It demands understanding. The future of global stability will not be decided by one incident, or one nation, or one response. It will be shaped by how often restraint is chosen, how disputes are managed, and whether shared systems are strengthened or slowly replaced. In that sense, this is not a story about conflict. It is a story about choice. If you value calm, thoughtful analysis that respects complexity and avoids outrage, consider subscribing to the channel. This is a space for understanding how global events connect us, not divide us. As power continues to shift and competition becomes more visible, the question is not whether the world will face tension, but how it will respond to it. Will shared spaces remain places of cooperation, even amid rivalry? Or will control gradually replace trust as the defining principle of global order? That answer is still being written, one decision, one moment, and yes, sometimes one stretch of sea at a time.